Hi, I'm Alex Garcia, and thanks for joining us here at NTWC Live. It is a team effort between Bill Reed, Tim Smith, and I. We'd like to say thank you to a few groups that helped make this possible. It's USAA, South Padre Island Convention and Tourist Bureau, the Weather Company, and the Weather Boy. And now, here's Tim Smith.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to NTWC Live for Wednesday, the 17th day of August of 2022. Good to have you along with us today. And I think an exciting program today. We're going to talk about insurance and catastrophe claims and all kinds of stuff like that. Lisa Miller's with us from Disaster and Insurance Recovery. We're going to talk about that coming up in just a little bit. Of course, before we get started, we want to thank all of the folks who make these NTWC Live broadcasts a possibility. USAA, from the beginning, they've been part of what we've been doing, and we appreciate USAA more than you can imagine. The South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau. South Padre Island is the host for the National Tropical Weather Conference. When we meet in person, we'll be back there again in April of 2023. Hope to see a lot of you in person on South Padre Island coming up in just a few months. The Weather Company, Visit Brownsville, The Weather Boy, Black Magic Design, Walmart, Port of Brownsville, all part of what we do here at NTWC Live, and we're glad to have everybody along. Along with us today, Hal Needham is with us, and Bill Reed, former director of the National Hurricane Center. Hal Needham, who I believe is now in a collaboration with Dr. Phil Klotzbach about how many Major League Baseball games have been canceled because of hurricanes. We'll talk about that a little later. And Bill Reed, again, former director of the National Hurricane Center. And guys, since we last met a week ago, I've had 6 inches of rain in drought-stricken South Texas. We've gone from serious drought to no drought in a matter of 4 days. Bill?
Yeah, and I'll show you here in a minute what might add to your largesse in getting good rains,
so are we going to make it better or worse? I don't know.
Judging from the view we got of Lisa's yard, that Tallahassee's doing well this summer also. Let me do a quick rendition of what's going on in the tropics today. As we all know, it's coming up on the peak of the season, and this is the current 5-day tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center. And lo and behold, we have a system that's a wave over Central America now, forecast out into the southern Gulf, and then move up the west coast of the Gulf out of the Bay of Campeche, and only has about a 20% chance of developing, but the tropical moisture that comes with that wave, you get here about the same time as the front is dying along the coast. So challenging forecast, even if we don't get a tropical storm out of it. This is a low-level water vapor loop of the whole basin today. The Pacific is relatively quiet. It's not conducive to development now, though. Yvette's remnants are still firing away out in here that we had a few days ago. Here is our tropical wave. It looks like fairly organized convection, but at the present time, there's no circulation at the surface. And they're heading east out of there. This is huge, expansive dry air and a couple of waves that have been coming off of Africa that may or may not bode interesting down the road, but they're outside the 5-day outlook period. Here's a closer up view of our Caribbean system now, and again, it looks like pretty healthy convection there. It's been moving steadily west-northwestward. Should be over the Yucatan tomorrow, and then emerge into the Gulf Friday, and then approach the Texas coast late Saturday and Sunday. And normally I don't show what's going on in the desert, but this little cluster of rain that you see here is what's left of 98L that gave Tim all his excitement there this last weekend. I'm going to try something real tricky here. Stop, share. And for a system that never had 30 knots of sustained winds, the circulation feature is holding together pretty well. This is the current radar out of El Paso, and you can see we have a little circulation going on down there. Back to the ink. There we go. All right. What the model show is this is the moisture, precipitable water, and surface pressure, and 850 winds, and you can see the moisture streaming northward. And in the GFS, it doesn't really close off a low in the model run this morning, and then it makes the moisture makes landfall in South Texas over the weekend, and then it's back to summer as usual as far as that goes. But then the GFS kicks off spins up a little spin coming off of Venezuela and holds it together as it comes into the Northwest Caribbean and then Gulf of Mexico. And of some interest, I imagine, to Lisa, the model shows it coming up beyond 10 days and affecting Florida, if that were the case. Remember, it's just a model thing. There's nothing that it's forming off of right now that I can identify. So we'll wait and see. It could be a model cane. This feature forms off a wave that comes off of Africa in about 3 or 4 days. So at least it's forming it off of something real, but it shows a fairly formidable hurricane. It way out in a long time, so I wouldn't, again, spend a whole lot of time worrying about that. The European model does the same thing with our system coming out of the Caribbean, which is kind of to be expected. And it does close off a low, but again, it doesn't intensify it to tropical storm strength in the deterministic run. And the same as the GFS, it brings it inland over the weekend. And it doesn't do a thing in the Caribbean and Gulf, which leads me to believe we're maybe looking at fiction coming out of the GFS for out beyond 10 days. And it doesn't really do anything with the waves coming off of Africa, at least in the deterministic model. Let's go on here. One more thing. This is looking at all the ensemble members out of the European, and there's quite a few members that are happy with the disturbance coming out of the Caribbean, but never intensifying it significantly. And it does show occasionally some development on the systems coming off Africa, but at least in the 10-day frame we're looking at, nothing you can really hang your hat on right now. But it is that time of year, so we'll keep an eye on it. Okay. I think we're back to where I'm supposed to be now. Okay, we have, as Tim mentioned, we have Lisa Miller with us today. Lisa Miller is a disaster insurance and recovery expert, earning a reputation as a tireless consumer advocate. Her firm of Lisa Miller and Associates is based in Tallahassee, Florida, and provides government consulting and advocacy in Florida's legislative and executive branches, business development, public relations, with a percentage of her time devoted to volunteer advocacy helping consumers. Pertinent to what we do in the hurricane world, her hurricane field policy experience started with Hurricane Andrew, and believe it or not, 30 years ago in 1992, and the more recent storms of Hurricane Michael and Hurricane Irma. Previous career move, she was Florida's Deputy Insurance Commissioner and Deputy Chief Financial Officer, and led the My Safe Florida Home Program, which is a highly successful effort to get people to strengthen their homes against hurricanes, which has proven to be a worthy endeavor. Lisa grew up in Florida and attended Florida State University, and not in meteorology. We're used to talking to meteorologists out of Florida State, but obviously in the business management and public administration. So welcome to our show, Lisa.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with these very distinguished guests. Those of you that follow the weather know it like I know it. Every raindrop matters. So I kind of want to visit with all of you today that this really isn't about the weather or about the environment. It's about the people that it affects. And I want all of us today to think about, in whatever vertical we're in, whether it's the insurance side, the disaster recovery side, the municipal side, it's all about the customers that we serve, whether we call them taxpayers, clients, claimants. That's what this is all about, is how we help those to prepare for it before, during, and after. So I hope that's what we can do today, and spend some time talking about how to make life better in regard to the weather and disasters.
That's great. Maybe a brief description of what you and your company do would help for getting people on board with where we're going today.
Sure, happy to do that. I started in insurance regulation in 1988, and of course Hurricane Andrew hit in 1992. And if you think about what happened during that time, there were no cell phones. I mean, you used pay phones. It was all pay phones. Remember, you put a dime in and a quarter, whatever it was at the time. And we had an insurance commissioner, Tom Gallagher, at the time, who was from Miami. And he got a call from his sister who said, "You have no idea how bad it is down here. You've got to get down here." Because remember, we didn't have instant news. We had to, see photos where people had Polaroid cameras, right? So he immediately responded, sent teams of us down there to look at insurance policies, to console people. Most important thing we did was console people, because it was the biggest shock that they'd ever seen. Fast forward in the 04 and 05 storms, where we had all those storms hit Florida in the span of 2 years, over 1 million claims, billions of dollars in losses. We learned a lot. We went 10 years without a storm, which helped the insurance industry, build their surplus, put money in the bank, basically, to be able to pay their claims and to improve their research and development and to make them stronger. And a lot of people think, oh, they're just rich, greedy insurance companies. Well, if you think about it, we want them to have surplus in the bank, because that's how they pay our claims. So it's, not a good idea if they don't. And so in 04 and 05, we were very fortunate. We only lost 3 or 4 companies, one large company out of Tampa, but we had helped that 10-year hiatus of no storm really helped build the reserves. From one storm to the next, we really were able to help them build the reserves. And the insurance commissioner at the time was Kevin McCarty. And I worked with him for many years. I came out of government in the mid-2000s, and I've been working with the insurance industry as well as the disaster recovery industry. If you think about the intersection between the two, I spend my days talking about property insurance on the one hand and efficient disaster recovery and response on the other hand. And people either run toward me or they run the other way. Because when you talk about property insurance, most people, they don't understand it. They pay a premium. They don't like their insurance company. They got to have it because they've got a mortgage. If you think about what property insurance is and what it's not, it is to be there when your home is damaged. It's not there to replace your roof that's got normal wear and tear. Let's just face it, it's not a warranty policy. It is to have people come to your house when things happen in the property insurance arena and to care about you and your homeowner and your largest asset. Well, then think about disaster recovery. We have federal funds that come in after a storm, and we want FEMA and the other federal agencies to build up their surplus so that they have an unlimited checkbook, but that they are able to come help us when the time comes. And it is about making sure that we keep our homes maintained so that those federal agencies don't have to spend as much as we feel like they should sometimes to help us get back on our feet. So the intersection between property insurance and federal recovery is a huge bridge. And if we work really hard to make our communities and our homes more resilient and stronger, it reduces the loss for the property insurance industry, which ultimately can reduce our premiums. So I spend my days trying to educate policymakers, state legislators, federal congressional officials, local, state, and county officials, that if they would just connect the two and work together to see that when they make their communities more resilient, they take advantage of FEMA funding grants, all kinds of resilient grants, it ultimately affects not only their property insurance premiums, but their flood insurance premiums through the NFIP, and it's a win all the way around. So to say that I talk for a living is an understatement, Bill.
Yeah, me too. I got the impression when I moved over there that the My Safe Florida home program was developed to kind of foster the idea you were just talking about building homes better, or preparing the homes better for the almost certain to happen sometime down the road, wind disasters for one specific thing. Is that pretty much a correct assumption?
That's true. That program kicked off in 2005. We had the 04 and 05 storms, and at the time, Governor Jeb Bush, he wanted to, the word was mitigation back then. Now it's resilience. And no one knew what mitigation was. And when I presented in front of the Florida cabinet, as we kicked off the program in 05, I said, I want to make mitigation as cool as Starbucks. He still remembers that quote. And we worked very hard to say to people simple things like, a roof strap to pull that roof down on top of the house. You lose your roof, you lose your house. A garage door brace, a brace so that the wind doesn't push that garage door in. Windows that can withstand the hurricane force winds. There's 7 or 8 simple things that you can do to a home or even a commercial structure that makes your properties more resilient. We all know this on this call, and for the listeners around the world, it just makes sense to make things stronger before the wind blows. So fast forward in May of this year, Governor DeSantis, in his efforts to educate Floridians, kicked off another version of the My Safe Florida Home program, and it is in the process of ramping up right now. Same idea. You get a home inspection that tells you the strength of your home. Is it a Volkswagen? Is it a Chevrolet? Is it a Cadillac? Do you want to make it a Cadillac? And the government will give a $10,000 grant, and you need to match half of that for certain income levels. And the program is easy to find online, the My Safe Florida Home program. And has not kicked off officially, but every opportunity we get to educate people that when you spend $1 on resiliency, you've seen the federal statistics, it can save $7 to $8 in agony and repair. And if you invest on the front end, saves you on the back end. The insurance companies listening to this call, they would welcome the opportunity to educate their policyholders, and they do, on what they need to do. I just got a brand new metal roof put on my house. The code requires 3 clips. I put 5 clips. It may have cost me another $800 or whatever. Just makes so much sense. So Bill, let's make sure we continue to pound the pavement. What you do on the front end affects you on the back end.
Yeah, and the thing I like about a program like My Safe Florida Home was it incentivized doing this. It gives a little spur of something. Hey, you're going to help me out doing this. That may get people that say I need to spend money on other things and not do it. That might give them the incentive to go out and take on these what seemingly minor mundane tasks that actually may help your household together in a hurricane.
We just had this call yesterday with FEMA. One of my roles in my consulting firm is I have the privilege of serving as a policy advisor to the Disaster Recovery Coalition of America, www.thedrca.org. And we can put this in the show notes so people can find it. And the Disaster Recovery Coalition of America is about 50 of the largest contractors in the country that come into communities before and after a storm, either preaching resiliency or recovery and response. And yesterday we were on a call with FEMA, and FEMA wants to make their processes better. I believe it. I know it. I see it. And one of the ways they want to do that is improve communication, is to be able to have a better discussion, particularly with local governments, because they have a process called the FEMA Public Assistance Funding, which is different than individual assistance, which goes to homeowners. Public assistance is what it sounds like. It's funding to go to public agencies, cities, counties, school boards, et cetera. And FEMA want to make that process better. Should they be more granular? Should they hold workshops? In Florida alone, we have 423 cities, 67 counties. Many of those 32 of our 67 counties are considered fiscally constrained, which means they're small. Their city manager takes out the trash. Their police chief is probably the fire chief, right? So we've got to really focus on the big communities, they've got resources. They can hire staff. They understand resiliency. They're going after, the federal money. But I think FEMA wants to look at strengthening some of the smaller communities, and giving them the tools that the big communities have to get them on par for the next storm. So we want to applaud our FEMA partners. If you don't know who your region FEMA partner is, you should pick up the phone, like Tony Robinson is in the whole Texas Region 6, other regional administrators throughout the state. If you're on the private sector side and you're with an insurance company, we can get you the name and phone number of the FEMA region director. You should know who they are and continue to build that bridge between property insurance and disaster recovery.
Yeah, I heard a lot of people that are even in the public sector, first responder types, and those that come into recovery said that even they have trouble understanding the hoops they've got to jump through to work with FEMA in the recovery and resiliency phase. So yeah, anything they can do to improve that would be a plus.
One of the discussions yesterday, you'll get a kick out of this. Part of FEMA public assistance funding is you have to satisfy certain environmental historical parameters. And, in Florida, we have beautiful historic landmarks. They get hit by hurricanes too. And so you have to be very sensitive to how you're restoring it and when you're asking for funding to restore it. And some of those benchmarks are very strict. And one of the discussion folks, there were about 35 people on the call, said that they wanted to pressure wash an old historic school building. And the FEMA leader said, well, what's the horsepower of the pressure washer? And he said, well, what should it be? And they hemmed and they hawed and they said, no more than 4 horsepower. And he said, a faucet is 45 horsepower. So we need you to go back and look at that. So just silly little things like that could be just made so much better and so much easier. So FEMA's trying. We're all struggling with staff shortages. They are too. We're all trying to find folks that will dig in and be critical thinkers and innovative thinkers. They are too. The federal government is. So we're all in this together, Bill.
And your notes that were sent to me is that you were obviously involved with Hurricane Michael, that being a similar intensity storm to Hurricane Andrew. What can you share with us that compares what you learned in Andrew versus what you're learning in Michael?
I reflect on that. In Andrew, I just remember getting on a plane out of Tallahassee with 15 other people from the Department of Insurance, sitting in the lobby of a hotel that had a generator running, and nobody had any of, it was all paper files, right? You had a paper file. Most everyone we talked to, and we set up what were called disaster resource centers, DRC, disaster recovery centers, DRCs, and nobody had in their files their insurance policy. So for us to try to help as insurance experts, they didn't have what we needed to look at to see what their coverage was. And back in those days, this was in Florida, we had about 4 companies that wrote 90% of all the insurance policies in Florida. And reaching them was difficult because the phone lines were down. So you fast forward to Michael. The DRCs, we call them insurance villages. The CFO, insurance commissioner of our state, set these insurance villages up. And the insurance companies came with their mobile units. They're called mobile emergency response vehicles, MERVs. And they set up satellite offices in these MERVs. And they had electronic communication with the home office. And if someone came to the MERV and they couldn't find their folder of their policy, it was all done online and you could look at what their coverages were. And they could assign an insurance adjuster. Mr. Needleman knows that very well. To get those insurance adjusters out quickly, because if you don't get those out quickly, you're increasing the amount of damage. A delayed claim is a more expensive claim. And so the efficiency that the insurance industry, much like the disaster recovery industry, brings to a disaster is unbelievable. And if we also think about before the storm, Bill, you were talking about catastrophe models. There are several that are governmentally used models. NHC has theirs. I work in the insurance catastrophe model space. There's AIR worldwide, one of four. There's only really four big ones in the world that the big reinsurers look at, et cetera. And AIR, they've got a flood model, a tornado model, a hurricane model. And we didn't have that back in Hurricane Andrew. In fact, these catastrophe models did not come of age until a few years after Hurricane Andrew. And as we know, models are a guess. There's no specificity no certainty, I guess. All they are is a guess, but they are the best guess. And they are very sophisticated at what they do. And I'll give you an example of that. In the United States, we have, say, 5 million flood insurance policies that are written by the federal government. Now, this is flood insurance, not property insurance. Two separate policies that have been separate for 50 years. And it's because we have a federal flood insurance program. And if you have a federal program, most private insurance companies weren't really interested in writing in that space. Up until about 4 or 5 years ago, when the flood insurance models, catastrophe models, started evolving with more sophistication. I made C's in science and statistics, so I'm not going to tell you exactly how these models work, but the level of sophistication and intelligence of a flood model, for example, have given comfort to the private insurance companies now to dip their toe in the water for private flood insurance, moving away from the federal government. So these models are the best we got. And our goal ultimately is to try to unwrap some of that NFIP business, put it in the private sector, make sure it's profitable for an insurance company. You want an insurance company to make a profit so they can pay their claims. I'm trying to unwrap the consumer folks who disagree with me and think that they shouldn't make profits, which is just anathema to me. And these flood insurance models are helping. I'll give you an example. In Florida, back in 2016, 17, we worked with Senator Jeff Brandes, who passed the very first flood insurance law in the country that encouraged private flood insurance, that encouraged private insurance companies to get in this flood insurance space away from the federal government. Right now in Florida, 35, 40 companies are registered to write flood insurance. And my homeowner's insurance policy, I have a flood endorsement, which is an add-on. So I have one policy, flood endorsement and homeowner's policy. I use the same adjuster if the time comes. It's a beautiful model. Those models, that technology is what moved us forward. So you go to Hurricane Michael and the technology there with that Cat 5 versus what happened in 92 with Hurricane Andrew, it's night and day. And we should be grateful to the scientists, the engineers, the meteorologists, the hydrologists that are keeping America on the forefront of catastrophe prediction. Back to you, Bill.
Yeah, that's a very I was not aware that we were that many insurance companies were looking into writing flood insurance. I ask mine every time there's a review, and they just say nope, they're not doing it. Maybe a Texas thing, I don't really know, but yeah, I do remember that with the National Flood Insurance Program from the onset, the goal was to fill the gap where there was at the time, but the end goal was to eventually turn it all over to the private sector. So it's good to see that's coming that way. Hal, you're in this line of work. I'm stealing all the show here. Why don't you ask some questions?
I've been loving the discussion here. This has been great. I've been learning a lot. Lisa, I love your perspective on building better, building stronger. I know, for example, there's a nonprofit called Smart Home America. They're helping promote something called a fortified roof. It's really popular in Alabama. In fact, Alabama homeowners have been able to get a $10,000 grant to get a fortified roof. And there are thousands of these roofs that were in place when Hurricane Sally hit South Alabama in 2020. And they found almost all of the fortified roofs did very well in Hurricane Sally. Is a program like that, like Fortified, is that talked about in Florida? Are there other programs like that? I mean, what are your thoughts on a program like that? I didn't know if you're familiar with it.
I am. The Fortified program was birthed with the Institute of Business and Home Safety out of Tampa, Florida. And the leaders at IBHS, in fact, the former NFIP administrator, Roy Wright, runs that program now. A dynamic woman, Julie Rochman, ran it and kicked it off many years ago and was the, I don't want to say founder, but I mean, it was her brainchild. And they've got about, 35, 40 insurance companies and others on their board. They do amazing work. They have a whole lab up in South Carolina. If you've never been to the IBHS lab, you should go. You should watch them burn a house, flood a house, put wind on a house. It's fascinating. And then what happens, we call it the tale of two houses, ones that did and ones that did not. Florida's building code is the strongest in the nation. So, the fortified parameters, a lot of that's in our building code. Even though our building code is the minimum, a lot of people do what's called code plus. And even if our building code is the minimum, it's stronger than anywhere else. And the Miami code being the strongest in the country. Very proud of that fact. Of course, you can have the building code, but you also have the building official that enforces it. And what we learned in Hurricane Andrew was they had a code, but nobody enforced it. And so I do a lot of work with the Building Officials Association of Florida, maybe your next guest for your radio show. The building officials are what will make the difference between a home that will survive it and won't, because it doesn't do any good for me to have a metal roof if it's not installed properly and not signed off on by that building official. In Hurricane Michael, when I toured, and what I do after a storm, when it hits Florida particularly, is I get in my little car and I drive to the affected area and I do my best to get past the watchman standing at the border gates, because they're stopping people from looting. I don't really look like a looter. And I go to the locations and I'm knocking door to door. I have addresses for my insurance companies, making sure that those claimants and homeowners are okay on behalf of such and such insurance company. And what I saw in Hurricane Michael was that entire metal roofs lift off the structure and were laying next door on the side in the side yard, strictly from incorrect installation. So when we talk about fortified roofs, it's as much about the roof composition as it is the installation, if that's helpful.
Lisa, post Hurricane Andrew, the building code changed in South Florida, right? But not for the entire state, as far as I understand. And then after Michael, did the code change for the entire state? Were there adjustments in North Florida? Could you kind of walk us through what happened post Andrew and then what happened post Michael in Florida for building codes?
Great question. Post Andrew, absolutely. Major change. Think tanks, discussions, focus groups, town hall meetings, all of it. Unfortunately, the Panhandle has a carve out from the very strict building code provisions that we have in our state. And there's a certain section of the Panhandle. If you think about Florida, so I'm going to show on my camera. Here's the Panhandle from Pensacola to Tallahassee. And then you go down the side of the state, and that down here, that's my dog, Katie. She's saying hello. You go down the side of the state, and that particular, that's where you get into what we call the Tri-County, Miami, Palm Beach, Broward, right? And so what I would suggest is think about the carve out in the Panhandle, which caused some of the damage in Hurricane Michael because it's not as strong. Then you ask, why a carve out? Why a carve out? I guess I can just say politics. Some of the officials over there felt like their constituents could not afford to build a fortified home or an extra strong home, and answered the call of their constituents and said, we're going to save them money. Very short-sighted. I actually know the senator that put that into effect. Very short-sighted. And to this day, that code is not as strong as the rest of Florida. So remember, what's rational in business is the opposite in politics. And so that's where we are with the code in the Panhandle. Post Hurricane Michael, it's still a weaker code.
Lisa, another question I have for you, and then we'll hopefully go. Usually we have our viewers text in and email in some questions as well. I'm really curious about this. The last decade, we've seen some big disasters in Florida. Hurricane Irma in 2017, Hurricane Michael in 2018. But you can make an argument that Florida as a whole has been very lucky. There were a lot of near misses, right? Hurricane Matthew kind of mostly stayed off the East Coast in 2016. There were some impacts from St. Augustine north, but it could have been a lot worse. If Hurricane Irma was 100 miles farther east, that could have been putting Cat 3 or Cat 4 winds into Miami. And then in 2019, Category 5 Hurricane Dorian stalling over the Bahamas, 140, 150 miles east of West Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale. I can't imagine if that thing shifted 150 miles to the west. When we've seen a lot of these near misses, from your experience, does that make people say, wow, I live in a really dangerous neighborhood. My neighbors have been robbed, but I haven't. I need to up my security. Or do you see people saying, hey, we've been lucky, the luck's going to continue, and kind of get complacent? What do you think when you see all these big storms that were near misses? How does that affect people's psychology and their interest in insurance?
Well, that's another great question. In Florida, we've got neighboritis when it comes to new roofs. We've got a few roofing companies and trial lawyers, plaintiff lawyers that, and they're not all like this. I've got great friends on both in the roofing and the legal industry. So we have a lot of new roofs in Florida, just because people are knocking on doors soliciting new roofs, and it typically should not be paid for by an insurance policy. It's a normal wear and tear, but a lot of times the insurance companies just pay for the roof because it's cheaper than facing a court challenge that it should have a new roof. So we have a lot of new roofs. And so what happens is the neighbors see that this person got a new roof. And I have not done a study. Maybe that's what we'll do with the building officials, is look at the increase in roofing permits that have been pulled now versus, say, 5 years ago. And I think roofs they're getting replaced, and whether they should be paid for by the insurance company or not, it's a subject for another show. But it's happening just because you've got roofing solicitors looking for business because of no storms, and they're just knocking on roofs. Now, of course, a lot of them inflate the cost of those roofs. I talked to someone yesterday who said that the roof permit was $18,000. They were charging the insurance company $40,000. Pure permit fraud. All that we can talk about on another show, but we have a lot of new roofs in this state paid for legitimately or illegitimately by insurance companies. So just by default and by design, we're going to have a stronger roofing stock when the next storm hits, we hope. I also believe this. It's just like working in the legislature. Unless it happens now, if it happened 2 months ago, it's old news. And we have had a very quiet storm season. Here we are in the middle of August. And thank goodness for the Sahara dust. If we make it through, I asked my friends at AIR Worldwide, and they may be on your next show as well. Brilliant scientists. If we don't have a storm this season, it will be huge for this state, because our Florida property insurance market, let me give you a frame of how big it is. We have 7.5 million property insurance policies in Florida. Texas has about 11 to 12 million. California, I think, has about 18 million. Those are just round numbers. Property insurance policies. And about 90% of those, 85% of those are written by Florida-based insurance companies that have between 200,000 and 500,000 policies. Our government's insurance policy, Citizens Property Insurance, has 1 million of those policies. And so all those companies buy reinsurance, right? They insurance to back up insurance companies. And so they're able to weather a storm. But you're right. If you model that proposed Cat 5 or Cat 6, you've heard about the Category 6 storms. You've been following that? If you model those storms and it comes up the guts of Miami all the way up through Tampa, there's no amount of reinsurance or catastrophe funding that's going to save our state. It will be a federal event. So a lot of us hold our breath. I know hope is not a strategy, but we aren't sure we've got enough money. We have several billion in reserves, but you have a storm like a Cat 6 through Tampa and Miami, all bets are off.
Lisa, great perspective there. I do have one last question for you, but first I want to go over to Tim. I know a lot of times we have our viewers send in questions. Tim, do we have anything coming in online?
We do have a lot coming in online. So great discussion, and folks are responding in a big way. So let me ask just a couple of them. One comes from Barry, and he says, how do you reach the communities, the vulnerable communities who are at the most risk? In particular, people who live in older manufactured homes and those substandard 1970s mobile homes. How do you reach them? How do you get the word out to what they need to do?
I grew up in a small town, Plant City, Florida. If you don't know where it is, look it up on a map. It's the winter strawberry capital of the world. And in that town, it was the churches. we relied on the pastors. I mean, in Tallahassee, I live in a small town again. If I want to get the word out, I go to the pastors in a community because, you say what you want. Oh, people don't go to church anymore. Pastors have a certain level of respect in a community. I don't care if it's Catholic, Baptist, Methodist. I don't care. Whatever your religion is, if you've got someone that's a leader in a congregation, they are disciples of mitigation and and resilience and education, and you can get the word out through them. So I'd love to do a pastor program with y'all in some way, shape, or form. Pick 15 communities in the country, develop our message, and get the word out. Let's do it.
And I know that's something Barry is working on in particular. So he lives in the same community I do, and reaching the faith-based communities is an important thing. So thank you for that. Peter Black's asking, he says, I may be a bit behind in the times, but he wants to know what a metal roof is. Metal roofs have been around for a little while, but he says he's an Andrews survivor and was a damage investigator and a former student of Ted Fujita. So he wants to talk about metal roofs for a second. So
I'm going to show you, if you don't mind.
See one.
I'm in my backyard. Let me step out here and show you a metal roof. They're also called standing seam roofs. Bill, you probably can talk more about it while I'm doing a real shot. You want to go ahead and talk about the different roof type, composition shingles? Want to do that?
Yeah, but I'm a meteorologist, which means my knowledge of construction is I ask people, other people to tell me what it really means, but we actually have that kind of a roof on our add-on at our house in New Mexico. It'll last longer than I will. But they actually, the fortified people are adamant that even if you do it right, even the standard asphalt shingle roofs, they can make them withstand pretty high winds. The metal roofs intrigue me in hail country because hail damage is always a big issue.
Well, you're right. They say it'll outlast us a lifetime. I made the decision to spend the extra money and get the new roof on, and it really has made a big difference. They believe the safety of my home will be much, much better. So that's a great question, and talk to a reputable roofer, and off you go.
We've got another one coming online, and then I'll get back to Bill and Hal for their questions. But James wants to know what's the best way to navigate the insurance degrading that we're seeing now in Florida.
Tough question. So I'll try to do it quickly. We've had about a 5-year run of what I'll call claim inflation. And that's where someone charges a roofer, knocks on the door and says, you have a $40,000 roof, and we know it should be a $20,000 roof. And that's not illegal. I mean, claim inflation is, but proving it is tough. And so if it's proved, we have us a great case against some roofers. There's only a handful of roofers that are really gaming the system. But the hustle goes like this. You're home, and you get a knock on the door, and the roofer says, can I get up on your roof? I think you need a new roof. And of course, most people go, sure. You got a roofer at your door? They go on your roof. What do you think they say when they come down from your roof? You need a new roof. We'll submit it to the insurance company. We'll take care of the rest. Doesn't matter if that roof is normal wear and tear. Well, the thousands and thousands of roofing claims that are coming in that are typically inflated, the insurance company says, whoa, we've got a picture of that roof that we took when we wrote that policy, and it's a 20-year shingle. It's a 20-year roof. And folks, let's face it, to my roofing manufacturers that are on this program, there ain't no such thing as a 30-year shingle in Florida. I wish you would change your messaging, because when and there ain't no such thing as a 30-year roof in Texas. I would agree. Would you agree? The heat and it's just no such thing. So I'd love to get in front of a bunch of roofing manufacturers and ask them to change their warranties by state. But of course, I want straight hair too. So the insurance company says this is a wear and tear on a roof. Why should we be paying this? And again, they're at a decision point: pay it or get sued for denying it. So they have to make a business decision, and over and over and over again. So the insurance companies are increasing the rates. They're just passing on those costs to all of us for all these new roofs. And that's draining the surplus of our insurance companies to the point where some of them are losing their rating. Some are pulling out of the state, and they're tired of just having to roll over. Some of them fight the cases, but when you have a judge that awards an attorney $80,000 for a $20,000, attorney's fees for a $20,000 roof, it's crazy. That's a great subject for another program. How do we reduce insurance fraud and some of the hustle that goes with it? But we're praying for no storms this season. At some week we can create an environment to get our insurance companies back, because right now it's no fun to be an insurance executive in Florida. Trust me.
Great question and a great answer. Let's take a moment, thank our sponsors again. We'll go back to some more questions, but we do want to thank those who make these programs a possibility. USAA and the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau. Those are the two big guys that have been along from the very beginning of the National Tropical Weather Conference. So we appreciate everything they do to keep these programs going and keep great guests like what we're hearing today on this program. Hal, you said you had another one, and Bill, I'm sure you've got more. So let's go back to Hal, and then we'll go back to Bill. Hal?
Yeah, Lisa, I really appreciate what you explained with insurance fraud. My background is meteorology, climate science. I don't know that much about insurance, but when I go to conferences, I love what you said in the beginning of this broadcast, that it really does come back to the people. At the end of the day, there's weather data, there are weather models, but what is the impact on the people? So I do try to keep my ears open when I'm at these hurricane and flood conferences and just hear how people are talking about these storms affecting the people. And something I hear at a lot of these conferences, and I personally don't fully understand it, I'll hear people say, well, Florida is a hard place to write insurance. It's so litigious. There's so many, so much litigation happens there. And could you explain, are there differences between Florida and other states? Like, could you share a little context of that? I don't fully understand what they're talking about when they say that, but I know from some people's perception, there's a difference with Florida. Could you kind of explain the context of that, or maybe what your perception of that is on that topic?
One statistic from the insurance commissioner will say it all. And I'll give you the letter from the insurance commissioner to the House of Representatives for you to put in your show notes. 80% of all litigation in the country, property insurance litigation, 80% is in Florida. Yet only 8% of all property insurance claims are in Florida. Let that sink in. 80% of all property insurance litigation is filed in Florida, yet only 8% of all property insurance claims are filed in Florida. Does that tell you why there's so much litigation going on in Florida? We have over 100,000 open lawsuits. Every other state has less than 1,000. And it's because our statutory framework allows for a pretty sizable chunk of attorney's fees. Even if you lose, you get paid attorney's fees. We're the only state in the country that has that. And if any of the trial lawyers are listening to this call, hats off to you. You write more campaign checks. You're more politically engaged than I've ever seen. And you've been successful at stopping changes to that law. That may be coming, because once you start losing insurance companies, it wakes up the politicians that realize they got to do something. You can't continue. It is unsustainable. The litigation in this state is off the charts. Every day, thousands of lawsuits are being filed, like factories of lawsuits by about 20 law firms, causing 90% of the insanity. Can we turn it around? We better. That's all I can say.
Lisa, thank you for explaining that. I understand better now. You're saying the environment it gives these law firms incentive to keep pursuing this very aggressively. That makes sense. Now I think I understand the issue better. And I really appreciate your direct response to these questions. Bill or Tim, do you guys have any other questions?
Yeah. The slightly different tack there. I think you mentioned that you work a lot with the big construction type contractors and whatnot. You never really hear much as an organization on them on ways to improve the response and recovery after a storm hit. And it seemed like they could weigh in and maybe they're trying, I don't know, and help reduce some of the noise that goes on with it. I call them locusts. You get a hurricane come in and all these people come in from God knows where and say they're going to fix your roof, take your money, and then they never hear from them again. What do they say? What do you got on what they can do for us?
Thank you for that, Bill. There's two happenings after a storm. You have the locusts, the hustlers, I call them, that are knocking on doors. They get people to sign contracts, lock people in, take advantage of them when they're most vulnerable. There's a special place in hell for those kind of people, in my humble opinion. That's the ones that are trying to milk the insurance company system. Let me file a claim for you. It won't cost you a thing. I'll only charge you 10% when they figure out a way to inflate the claim and make more than that. It's really it's very, very disturbing. Then you have the FEMA and U.S. Army Corps contractors that are called in to do the big infrastructure projects. And to me, they're doing the Lord's work. I mean, they are, a lot of these, think about debris. Think of the 3 or 4 things that you have to have happen to get a community back on its feet after a storm. Jeb Bush, one of the best governors we've ever had, including our current governor, Jeb Bush said, you got to get the schools open. You got to get the offices, the work offices open, because if the schools are open, parents can go back to work. You got to get the restaurants open. Okay. And then above all that, you got to get the debris off the street so everybody can get the economy going again. So you've got these debris haulers, and they're out there picking up sticks and branches and clearing roads. Those debris haulers that are experts in, they typically contract with local truckers. They're big, huge contractors, national contractors, but they understand that you have to use the local talent that have the trucks to haul the stuff to the haul dump site. They don't get paid for 4, 6, 8 months after that storm. They're fronting those costs for the federal government. And they do it because A, it's lucrative in most cases. B, it's the right thing to do. I said to somebody, why do you do that? He said, because I'm too stupid to do anything else. So, those kind of debris haulers and the big construction companies that come in and rebuild the bridges, and they're rebuilding City Hall. Those companies that are members of the Disaster Recovery Coalition of America, they are what is rebuilding after a storm. They were the contractors when you heard the president talk about standing up a COVID hospital in 2 weeks. It's those contractors that are members of the DRCA, Disaster Recovery Coalition of America, that put those hospitals up in 2 days and 2 weeks. They're the ones that got the vaccines on the street. They are response experts, and they are recovery experts. And nobody really knows about them except for the federal government. I mean, if I say names like Tidal Basin and WSP and Cone Resnick, you never heard of these names. They're all on the website. But we owe them a debt of gratitude, not just because I work with that association, but I hear, they exercise plans, and they work on that. They're big believers in you plan your work and you work your plan pre-disaster. And they preach to local governments, don't wait for a disaster to do a contract, pre-contract. Why would you wait until after disaster to go seek these services? Put people on standby contracts. Hell, it's like being in the insurance business. We have insurance adjusters that we train to be on standby in case of a catastrophe. We put them in a reserve spot to be ready to deploy, because the worst thing that can happen is that we delay the response. A delayed response is a more expensive recovery. And if we keep that in mind, we will be much better for it. And if there's anything I can leave this very distinguished group and audience, is this: plan your work your plan from a macro standpoint, and people come to your back door. People you don't know come to your front door. Don't answer your front door after a storm, because it is not going to be good news. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, we just had this spring, we had a flurry of, I think it was just one company with several people coming by and saying, you need a new roof. You had a hailstorm here. Of course, they had no idea what my profession is. So really, when was the hailstorm? Where's the date on it? How big were the stones? And you get this stunned look in their eye, and then you say, go away, and they're gone to the next one. But sure enough, you see some roofs going in. It's been very informative. I actually picked up a few things I thought I knew that I didn't know, like that insurance companies are now picking up the flood insurance program. I think it's very important because they make you be able to get very creative to help both the high and low end of the market on that. And I can't believe I wasn't familiar with DRCA. So now I've learned that.
Yeah, the
Thank you.
Disaster Recovery Coalition of America. They are it's an awesome experience. We had a call with HUD, Housing and Urban Development, recently. We're still talking with them. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. If you look at all the federal funding that's coming down, last week we saw a couple of $2 billion coming to 50 states for infrastructure to solidify bridges. And I mean, you should just pull up that list of what state's getting what money. It's easy to find. USDOT, Secretary Buttigieg announced that last week. You're constantly seeing money coming out of the U.S. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, to clean up algae bloom. Our waterways are a mess. AECOM is a leader in cleaning up the harmful algal bloom problems we have in our waterways that result from leaking septic tanks, fertilizer runoff, that kind of thing. When a hurricane comes, it swirls up that algae and makes it worse in the water bodies. So we want to try to get ahead of the algae bloom before it blooms. A lot of the federal response or even state response is very important to keep our waterways clean. You have debris left over from storms because sometimes FEMA doesn't pay for private debris removal out of private water bodies. So you'll have spillover from that. So really all this is connected. I talk about the intersection between insurance and disaster recovery. All roads lead to insurance. Let's face it, if you can pay the premium, you can insure it. But we all have to think about, how does it affect the everyday American, everyday Floridian, everyday whatever state you're in, to educate them and get them engaged? And I take it all back to the pastors. Whether you're a member of that parish or parishioner or not, I think they are great disciples, and it's an untapped resource that we should tap as a body of experts about how to get the message out.
Right.
Terrific. Terrific program. Hal, do you have any last thoughts before we wrap up?
A last question. Lisa, I love what you shared about these pre-disaster contracts, like for debris removal, things like that. You're putting your ducks in a row before the storm even hits. Are there other services besides debris removal that communities should consider getting a pre-disaster contract, maybe with utilities, piping? Or are there other things that communities should be thinking about in that regard?
Absolutely, Hal. The more you can plan on the front end, the better on the back end. Most communities have a one-on-one with their utility companies. Seems like that's, that whole process where the utility companies know when they're going to pull from other communities to bolster depending on the size of the storm. The other pre-contract would be to have an expert on staff to pull down some of the FEMA funding and the HUD funding. Because as I said, in small communities, you've got the police chief being the fire chief. And so if you've got an expert that knows how the magic secret sauce to pull down this funding, this grant funding, that's always a great way to pre-position yourselves as well.
Thank you, Lisa. Really appreciate your insights this morning.
Thank you.
Great program, Lisa. Thank you so much. And we hope to have you back, because this has been really fascinating. And I think there's probably a lot more you can tell us about what's going on in your world in disaster recovery. Thank you, Lisa.
Happy to be here. Pleasure to do it.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hal Needham, thank you for your insight and questions today. And Bill, as always, great job kind of moderating things. We appreciate that a lot. I want to thank our sponsors once again, USAA, the Southbound Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Weather Company, Visit Brownsville, Weather Boy, Black Magic Design, Walmart, the Port of Brownsville, all those folks help make these events a possibility. So thank you for that. Next week, we're going to talk about the anniversary of Hurricane Harvey. We're coming up on, is it 5 years? Can you believe it's been 5 years already? And there's going to be a lot to talk about with that. A lot of people in this conversation. We're right in the middle of that. So that's going to be an exciting program next Wednesday at 10 a.m. So we'll see you next Wednesday. In the meantime, thank everybody for being on the program. Thanks to all the viewers, including Tim Marshall, wherever you are. Thanks for tuning in today. We appreciate that. Y'all have a great week. We'll see you next Wednesday.